Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack something absolutely massive. We're looking at the staggering scale and the really complex financial mechanics behind the world's wealthiest individual. We're going to look way beyond the daily headlines to build a rich, immersive understanding of exactly how this unprecedented fortune was constructed, how it's highly leveraged, and maybe most importantly, where it might be going next.
Okay, let's dive into this massive scale right away to put his $800 billion fortune into perspective against the rest of the world. To really wrap our minds around this, I want you to imagine the entire economic output, literally every good and service produced in a year, by 176 different nations. That combined economic weight is still lighter than the net worth of this one individual. It's a scale of wealth that honestly forces us to completely rethink how we even measure financial power in the modern era.
And yet he's aiming for a horizon 10 times further. When reminded of his current net worth recently by XPRIZE founder Peter Diamandis, Musk replied with these 4 words, 10 trillion or bust. It sets this truly cinematic, high-stakes narrative for his financial future. You see, he's not just looking to maintain a record. He's looking to establish an entirely new economic paradigm.
This comparison brilliantly illustrates his wealth historically because he has now comfortably eclipsed the unmatched century-old record held by oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller's fortune, which was built on the physical monopoly of oil, equated to about 1.5% of the United States gross domestic product back in 1913. Musk's wealth, on the other hand, built on technology, space infrastructure, and clean energy, now sits at a staggering 2.7% of U.S. GDP. So the modern tech titan hasn't just beaten the greatest industrial baron of the 20th century, he's operating in a completely different economic stratosphere.
Part 1. The Silicon Valley Foundation.
Before we hit those mind-bending numbers, we have to rewind and see how his early seed capital was originally generated. His wealth compounded rapidly through a series of successful tech ventures, basically transforming $500 of code into over $175 million by his early 30s. It started at age 12 with a video game called Blaster. Then an online city guide called Zip2 netted him $22 million. He poured that right into X.com, which became PayPal, ultimately yielding him nearly $176 million when eBay bought it. Think of this phase like a snowball rolling down a steep hill. Each exit provided the exact capital he needed to fund the next, exponentially larger ambition.
Part 2. Surviving the 2008 brink. However, that compounding trajectory wasn't a straight line, and by 2008, he hit an absolute financial cliff. Musk was staring down the barrel of total bankruptcy. It was basically like flying a plane while building it and suddenly realizing you are entirely out of fuel. SpaceX had suffered 3 consecutive devastating rocket launch failures. Over at Tesla, the company was hemorrhaging cash, losing about $10 million a month. Musk was down to his last $30 million and had to choose which of his children to save or risk losing both of them.
It was only a final, successful Falcon 1 launch and some desperate last-minute fundraising that saved both companies and ignited the engines of his modern fortune. That 4th launch proved the technology actually worked, securing a vital $1.6 billion NASA contract. Meanwhile, Tesla was saved by an emergency $40 million funding round that closed literally on Christmas Eve. He walked right to the edge of the abyss and somehow built a rocket to fly across it.
Part 3. The mechanics of wealth.
Now let's look at how he went from avoiding bankruptcy to flirting with $1 trillion net worth. His wealth isn't a giant swimming pool of cash, it's equity directly tied to the explosive valuations of SpaceX and Tesla's historic stock surges. For SpaceX, the value is driven by what's called the reusability flywheel. This is the idea that landing and reusing rockets slashes costs so drastically it allows them to launch thousands of Starlink satellites, which in turn prints massive revenue. It's a fundamental structural change in orbital economics, driving secondary market chatter to value the private company at up to $1.75 trillion. This structural change is essentially the rocket fuel for his net worth.
But the real ignition sequence happened in the public markets. For example, when Tesla joined the S&P 500 in 2020, institutional demand skyrocketed, his personal net worth by $140 billion almost overnight. Why? Because index funds are required to buy shares of companies added to the S&P 500, meaning billions of dollars automatically flowed into Tesla stock. It was a massive, systematic multiplier effect on his personal wealth.
So you might be wondering, how do billionaires actually access their money without selling their stock? Well, they use their company's shares as collateral to borrow massive sums of cash. Think of it kind of like taking out a home equity line of credit. You don't sell your house to get cash, you let the bank hold a lien on it.
Musk does this exact same thing, but instead of a house, he uses highly volatile tech stocks. This allows him to access billions in liquid cash without triggering the massive tax bills that would come from actually selling those shares. And despite his vast net worth, Musk actually often describes himself as cash poor, with up to 58% of his Tesla shares pledged as collateral for billions in personal loans. This is absolutely crucial to understand. His wealth is astronomically high on paper, for sure, but it's deeply tied up in shares that are actively being used to prop up other financial obligations. It's a brilliant but incredibly high-wire financial balancing act.
Part 4. The price of leverage. Let's see how this builds into an ecosystem of extreme financial leverage and high-stakes vulnerabilities. Because what happens when the collateral loses value? When Musk offered $44 billion to buy Twitter in a very seller-friendly deal, he committed to a massive $12.5 billion margin loan secured directly by his volatile Tesla stock. This verification document from the Delaware Court of Chancery really represents the moment the wall started closing in. By waiving traditional due diligence to get the deal accepted quickly, he locked himself into a binding contract that relied heavily on Tesla's stock price remaining high to fund the purchase. But as the broader tech market fell, his Tesla collateral lost billions in value, making the deal exponentially more expensive for him. So Musk heavily utilized public exchanges about bot accounts to attempt to exit the legally binding Twitter merger. As you'll see in these exchanges, Musk engaged users and tagged the SEC, arguing Twitter spam data was false. However, legally speaking, the courts essentially viewed this as an attempt to escape a contract that had simply become a bad financial bet due to his immense leverage. In the end, he ultimately had to close the deal.
Now, aside from leverage, another critical pillar holding up this massive wealth is approximately $38 billion in government support, spanning over 2 decades. While Musk is often viewed as the ultimate maverick private entrepreneur, the reality is that the public sector has been a foundational partner in building this entire empire.
From critical NASA resupply missions to environmental regulatory credits, these government funds have been absolutely essential to keeping the wealth engine running. SpaceX has received over $22 billion in contracts, which practically saved the company in its early days, and continues to build really lucrative, secretive spy satellites for the Defense Department. Meanwhile, Tesla benefited from over $11 billion in environmental regulatory credits, which basically means other automakers paid Tesla to offset their own emissions.
And looking at this neutrally, his highly public involvement in politics, from facing previous presidential threats of canceled contracts to accepting roles leading government efficiency today, injects a massive new layer of volatility into his net worth. Because so much of his revenue is intrinsically linked to government contracts and federal policy, his public disputes and alliances aren't just PR issues. They are direct material factors that can sway the valuations of his companies by tens of billions of dollars overnight.
So what does this all mean for the future? We are watching a single individual attempt to bend the arc of economic history. Will the flywheel of reusability and AI push him to $10 trillion? Or will the immense weight of margin loans and political gravity trigger the historic bust he talked about? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the mechanics behind the headlines, and I'll see you next time.